The last 11 cents. Elena Moore's hands trembled as she counted the coins one final time. 11 cents. That was all that stood between her 3 children and starvation. Her youngest, 2-year-old Thomas, lay limp in her arms, his skin burning with fever, his breathing shallow and rattling. The general store loomed before her like a courthouse where she'd already been judged and found wanting. Through the window, she could see the respectable women of Langford, Texas, their silk dresses rustling as they shopped, their laughter cutting through the summer heat. Elena looked down at her own torn dress, at the dust caking her children's bare feet, and knew what awaited her inside. But Thomas was dying, and she had no choice left. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elena's journey reaches, because what happens next will change everything. The August heat in Langford, Texas didn't just simmer, it condemned. It pressed down on the wooden sidewalks until they creaked, turned the air thick as molasses, and made decent people mean. Elena Moore had learned this truth over the past 3 months, ever since the fever took her husband James and left her with 3 children, a mountain of debt, and a town that had already decided her fate. She stood now on the porch of Henderson's General Store, Thomas limp against her chest, his small body radiating heat that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. Her other children, 6-year-old Sarah and 4-year-old Michael, pressed against her skirts, their eyes too large and faces gone hollow with hunger. They hadn't eaten a proper meal in 4 days. 11 cents. Elena's fingers closed around the coins until the edges bit into her palm. 11 cents wouldn't buy milk for Thomas, wouldn't buy bread for Sarah and Michael, wouldn't buy the medicine that might bring her baby back from whatever dark place the fever was pulling him toward. But she had to try. The bell above the door chimed as Elena pushed inside, and the conversation died like someone had thrown a switch. Mrs. Henderson stood behind the counter, her considerable bulk draped in fine cotton despite the heat, her mouth pursing as Elena entered. 3 other women, the banker's wife, the mayor's sister, and Mrs. Pritchard, whose husband owned half the land in the county, turned to stare. "We don't give credit," Mrs. Henderson announced before Elena could speak. "I told you that last week." "I'm not asking for credit." Elena's voice came out steady despite the trembling in her legs. "I have money. I need milk for my son. He's sick. And if you have anything for fever, 11 cents. Mrs. Henderson's eyes had already counted the coins in Elena's palm. "That won't even buy a pint of milk, let alone medicine. Please." The word scraped Elena's throat raw. "He's 2 years old. He hasn't kept anything down in 3 days. If I could just have a little milk, I'll find a way to pay you back." "The way you'll find a way to pay back the doctor?" Mrs. Pritchard's voice carried across the store, sharp as glass. "Or the undertaker? Or every other decent merchant in this town who was fool enough to extend credit to your husband?" Heat that had nothing to do with summer flooded Elena's face. "My husband died. The fever didn't make him gamble away every penny you had." The banker's wife adjusted her parasol as if Elena were something unclean she needed protection from. "The fever didn't make him drink himself into debt at the saloon every Saturday night. That's not—" Elena's protest died in her throat because it was true, all of it true. James had been a good man in so many ways, gentle with the children, quick to laugh, but he'd had demons of his own, and those demons had drunk away their savings and gambled away their future. His death had simply revealed the extent of the devastation he'd hidden. "You should be ashamed," the mayor's sister declared, her voice dripping with righteous judgment. "Standing there with your children, begging, when everyone knows you're the one who drove your husband to drink with your nagging. A good wife would have kept her man home." The words struck like physical blows. Elena felt Sarah press closer against her leg, heard Michael's small whimper. Thomas stirred in her arms, his forehead burning against her neck. "I'm not ashamed of needing help for my children." Elena forced herself to stand straighter. "I'm asking you, as one mother to another, for a little milk. My son is dying." "Then you should have thought about that before you let your husband destroy your family's reputation." Mrs. Henderson crossed her arms over her ample chest. "We work hard for what we have. We don't throw good money after bad. And we certainly don't reward women who can't keep their households in order. She probably wants the milk to sell it, Mrs. Pritchard added, her voice loud enough to carry beyond the store. I've heard stories about women like her. Next, she'll be selling those children to anyone willing to take them. That's a lie, Elena's voice cracked. I would never. Get out, Mrs. Henderson pointed toward the door. You're upsetting my customers. There's nothing here for you. Please. Elena could hear the desperation in her own voice, hated herself for it, but couldn't stop. Just a little milk. Look at him. Look at my son. She held Thomas forward, his small body limp, his breathing labored. For a moment, Elena thought she saw something flicker in Mrs. Henderson's eyes, some trace of human compassion, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. I said, get out. I won't have you bringing whatever disease that child has into my store. Sarah began to cry. Michael tugged at Elena's dress, his voice small and frightened. Mama? Mama, I'm hungry. The women's faces remained stone. Elena felt something break inside her chest, some last fragment of hope or dignity that she'd been clinging to. She turned toward the door, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall in front of these women who'd already taken so much. She'd made it 3 steps when the door opened. The man who entered had to duck his head to clear the frame. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway and hands that looked like they could break horses or build houses or hold back the world if needed. His clothes were dusty from travel, his face weathered by sun and wind, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples. But it was his eyes that caught Elena's attention, gray as storm clouds, and carrying the same kind of weight. The store fell silent again, but this silence was different. This silence held something like fear. Mr. Hartman, Mrs. Henderson's voice had lost its sharp edge. We weren't expecting you in town today. The man, Hartman, swept his gaze across the room, taking in the women in their fine dresses, Elena with her children, the tears on Sarah's face, Thomas's labored breathing. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. What's happening here? Nothing that concerns you, Mrs. Pritchard said, though her voice had lost some of its certainty. Just a bit of unpleasantness. The Moore woman was leaving. The Moore woman. Hartman's voice was quiet, but it carried. You mean James Moore's widow? The same, Mrs. Henderson sniffed. She came in here demanding credit, trying to take advantage of decent people's generosity. I heard what was said. Hartman stepped fully into the store, and the women unconsciously moved back. I was standing outside, heard every word. Elena felt her face burn with fresh shame. He'd witnessed her humiliation, heard her beg, seen her reduced to this. Hartman moved toward the counter with deliberate steps. The boy needs milk and medicine. What's the cost? Mr. Hartman, I don't think... What's the cost? Mrs. Henderson swallowed. For a quart of milk and fever medicine, $2, but... Hartman pulled bills from his pocket and laid them on the counter. Give her 3 quarts of milk, the medicine, bread, whatever meat you have, and add some candy for the other children. Mr. Hartman, really, this isn't necessary. Do it now. There was no threat in his voice, no anger, but Mrs. Henderson moved as if he'd cracked a whip. She began pulling items from shelves, wrapping them in brown paper with trembling hands. Hartman turned to Elena. Your son needs a doctor. I can't, Elena started, then stopped. Her pride was in tatters anyway. I can't pay a doctor. Dr. Warren owes me a favor, several favors. Hartman looked at Thomas, and something ancient and painful crossed his face. When's the last time he took fluid? Yesterday morning. He can't keep anything down. Then we're past milk. Hartman turned back to Mrs. Henderson. Forget the milk. Give me whatever the doctor would need. Clean water, cloths, salt. Mr. Hartman, I really must protest. You must do nothing except fill the order. Hartman's voice remained quiet, but every woman in the store flinched. Unless you want to explain to your husband why I'm moving my ranch account to the store in Blackwater. I spend about $500 a month here. I imagine the store in Blackwater would appreciate that business. Mrs. Henderson's face went white. That won't be necessary. I'll get everything ready. Elena watched this exchange with something like disbelief. She'd heard of Caleb Hartman. Everyone in 3 counties had heard of Caleb Hartman. He owned the largest ranch in the territory, ran cattle and horses, kept to himself on his land north of town. People said he was fair but hard, that he'd built his fortune with his own hands, that he'd lost his wife and child years ago and never recovered. People said a lot of things, but Elena had never expected to stand in the same room with him, let alone have him defend her against the most powerful women in Langford. Why? The word escaped before Elena could stop it. Hartman looked at her for the first time fully, really looked at her, and Elena saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Recognition, not of her, but of something in her. Some understanding of pain that had nothing to do with money or social standing or anything that happened in general stores. "Because I've stood where you're standing," he said simply, "and nobody helped." He turned to gather the supplies Mrs. Henderson had assembled, efficiently packing them into a crate. When he moved toward the door, he paused. "You coming?" "Where?" "To the doctor. Your boy's dying." The blunt words should have hurt, but they carried no cruelty, just truth. Elena looked at her children, Sarah with her tear-stained face, Michael with his hollow eyes, Thomas barely breathing in her arms, and made her decision. Yes. She followed Caleb Hartman out of the store, her children trailing behind, leaving the respectable women of Langford staring in shocked silence. Outside, a wagon waited, sturdy and well-made, pulled by 2 strong horses. Hartman loaded the supplies, then turned to lift Sarah and Michael into the back. He did it carefully, his large hands gentle, as if they were made of something precious and breakable. "Can you climb up?" he asked Elena. "Yes." She managed to haul herself onto the seat with one hand, Thomas clutched against her chest with the other. Hartman climbed up beside her and took the reins, his movements economical and sure. They rode in silence through the town, past the neat houses with their white fences, past the church where Elena hadn't been able to show her face since James died, past the saloon where her husband had drunk away their future. People stopped to stare. This odd procession of the richest man in the territory, driving a wagon carrying the poorest widow and her starving children. Let them stare, Elena thought with sudden fierce defiance. Let them judge. Thomas was burning up in her arms, and for the first time in months, someone was actually helping rather than condemning. "How old is he?" Hartman asked as they left the main street. 2. He'll be 3 in October. If he lives that long, Elena didn't say, but the words hung between them anyway. "And the others?" "Sarah's 6, Michael's 4. Hartman nodded, his eyes on the road. "They look like they haven't eaten well in some time." There was no judgment in the observation, just fact, and somehow that made it easier to answer honestly. "We haven't. My husband left debts. Everything we had went to pay them, and it still wasn't enough. I found work washing clothes, but it only brings in $1 a week, and the rent is $4 a month. I've been choosing between food and keeping a roof over their heads." "James Moore was your husband?" "Yes." "I knew him, slightly." Hartman paused. "He played cards at my ranch once, lost $20, paid it back the next day, every penny. Said he'd promised his wife he wouldn't gamble money he didn't have." Elena felt tears sting her eyes. That had been early in their marriage, when James was still fighting his demons, still trying. Before the fight started, before the drinking got worse, before everything fell apart. "He tried," she said softly. "He really did try. But something in him was broken, and I didn't know how to fix it." "Some things can't be fixed, only survived." The words carried weight, and Elena glanced at Hartman's profile. The strong jaw, the lines etched deep around his eyes, the mouth set in a line that suggested he knew exactly what he was talking about. They reached Dr. Warren's house, a tidy white structure on the edge of town with a shingle hanging outside declaring his profession. Hartman tied off the horses and came around to help Elena down. His hands on her waist were careful, impersonal, but steady, and Elena realized it had been months since anyone had touched her with anything resembling kindness. Dr. Warren opened the door before they knocked, his expression shifting from pleasant inquiry to professional concern as he saw Thomas. "Caleb, what have we here?" "Sick child, high fever, dehydration, not eating, needs help now. Dr. Warren's eyes flicked to Elena, and she saw the recognition, the judgment beginning to form, but Hartman stepped forward. She's my guest, Samuel. I expect her treated with the respect due any patient. Something passed between the two men, some understanding or old debt, and Dr. Warren's expression smoothed into professional neutrality. Bring him inside. The doctor's examination room was clean and cool, with large windows letting in light and shelves lined with bottles and instruments. Elena laid Thomas on the examination table, her hand shaking as she stepped back. Dr. Warren worked quickly, checking Thomas's pulse, his breathing, lifting his eyelids to check his pupils. His face grew grave. How long has he been like this? The fever started 4 days ago. He stopped taking fluid yesterday. Yesterday? Dr. Warren's voice sharpened. Why didn't you bring him in sooner? Because I had no money, Elena wanted to scream. Because your wife is friends with Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Pritchard, and she's made it clear what she thinks of me. Because I knew you'd refuse to see him without payment. She's here now, Hartman said quietly from the doorway where he stood with Sarah and Michael. Can you help the boy? Dr. Warren pressed his lips together, then nodded. It's pneumonia. Advanced. He needs fluids, medicine, constant care. Even then, he didn't finish the sentence. Even then what? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Even then, I can't promise anything. He's very weak. If he'd been brought in even a day earlier, but he wasn't, Hartman interrupted. So what do we do now? Dr. Warren looked at Thomas, then at Elena, then at Hartman, and something in his expression softened slightly. He needs to be kept cool. Fluids forced down every hour, even if he vomits, medicine every 4 hours. Someone needs to stay with him constantly. If the fever breaks in the next 24 hours, he has a chance. If not, I'll stay with him, Elena said immediately. Whatever he needs, I'll do it. You'll need help. You can't stay awake for 24 hours straight. I can. No, Hartman said from the doorway. You can't. Not alone. Elena turned to look at him, the stranger who'd already done more for her in 1 hour than her entire town had done in 3 months. What are you suggesting? My ranch. It's an hour from here, but it's quiet, clean, and I have a housekeeper who knows about nursing. We can care for the boy there. And your other children can eat properly while we do. I can't, Elena started automatically, but Hartman cut her off. You can't pay. I know. I'm not asking you to pay. Then why? Why would you help us? Hartman's eyes met hers, and Elena saw the truth there before he spoke. A truth that had nothing to do with charity or pity and everything to do with the weight both of them carried. Because 6 years ago, my wife and daughter burned to death in a fire while I was out on the range. I got home in time to hear them screaming, not in time to save them. His voice remained steady, but his hands clenched at his sides. I've spent 6 years asking myself what I could have done differently. This, helping your son, this I can do. This I can save. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, rippling outward. Elena understood then. This wasn't charity. This was penance. This was a man trying to save what he'd once lost, even if it came in the form of a stranger's dying child. Okay, she whispered. Yes. Thank you. Dr. Warren worked quickly, preparing medicine, filling bottles with water mixed with salt and sugar, writing instructions. Sarah and Michael stood silent in the corner, their eyes wide, taking in everything, the clean room, the medicine bottles, the large man who'd brought them here, their mother's tears. Within 20 minutes, they were back in the wagon, Thomas wrapped in clean cloths, medicine and supplies packed around them. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of amber and rose. Under other circumstances, it would have been beautiful. They rode north, away from Langford, away from the general store and the respectable women and the judgment that had nearly killed her son. Elena held Thomas close, feeling his small heart beat against her chest. Too fast, too weak, but still beating. Tell me about them, she said after a while, her voice soft so the children in the back wouldn't hear. Your wife and daughter. Hartman was silent for so long that Elena thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Catherine was strong. Not physically, she was small, delicate-looking, but strong in her heart. She came west from Boston, left her whole family behind to marry me when everyone told her she was crazy. And Anna, his voice caught. Anna was 4. She had Catherine's eyes and my stubborn streak. She wanted to learn to ride, wanted to help with the horses, wanted to do everything her papa did. What happened? Lamp oil. A knocked-over lamp while Catherine was cooking dinner. The whole house went up in minutes. Our neighbor saw the smoke, rode to get me, but I was checking the north pasture. By the time I got back, he stopped, his jaw working. I could hear them screaming from half a mile away. I ran into that house twice. Burned my hands, my arms. Couldn't reach them. The beams had fallen. The smoke was too thick. I had to stand outside and listen to them die. Elena felt tears slip down her cheeks. I'm so sorry. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back. Hartman's hands tightened on the reins. I built a new house, bigger, safer, stone instead of wood. But it's empty. 6 years and it's still empty. They rode in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, not uncomfortable, but full of shared understanding. They were both survivors of losses that had left them hollowed out, both trying to find some way to keep moving forward when everything that mattered had been taken away. The Hartman Ranch appeared as the sun touched the horizon. It was bigger than Elena had imagined, a sprawling stone house with wide porches, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings, all of it nestled against rolling hills that stretched toward the darkening sky. Everything spoke of careful planning, substantial investment, and a loneliness that no amount of success could fill. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, older, gray-haired, her face weathered but kind. This is Margaret, Hartman said, helping Elena down from the wagon. She's run my house since Catherine died. She'll help with the boy. Margaret took one look at Thomas and immediately shifted into action. Bring him inside. Second room on the left. Sarah, Michael, come with me. Let's get you fed while we work. The house interior was as impressive as the exterior. Solid furniture, clean floors, large windows. But it was empty of the things that made a house a home. No children's toys scattered across the floor. No woman's touch in the decorating. No sound of laughter or life. Just empty rooms that echoed with ghosts. Margaret led them to a bedroom, clean, spare, with a large bed and windows facing east. She pulled back the covers and gestured for Elena to lay Thomas down. I've seen pneumonia before, Margaret said, her voice brisk but gentle. Lost my own boy to it 30 years ago. We'll need cool water, clean cloths, and prayers. You religious girl? Not anymore, Margaret nodded as if this was an acceptable answer. Then we'll rely on medicine and stubbornness. Get those clothes off him. We need to bring the fever down. They worked through the night, Elena, Margaret, and sometimes Hartman, who appeared with fresh water or clean cloths without being asked. They sponged Thomas's small body with cool water, forced medicine and sugar water between his lips, changed his sweat-soaked sheets. Sarah and Michael slept in another room, their bellies full for the first time in days, safe behind stone walls and locked doors. Thomas burned. He thrashed and whimpered, crying out in delirium for his papa, for water, for relief that wouldn't come. Elena held him when he seized, whispered to him when he cried, refused to let go even when Margaret tried to spell her. You need rest, the older woman urged around 3 a.m. I need my son to live. Margaret's expression softened. You're a fierce one. Good. He'll need that fierceness to pull through. Dawn came slowly, painting the eastern sky in shades of pearl and rose. Elena sat by the window, Thomas in her lap, and watched the sun rise over Hartman's empty ranch. She was exhausted, terrified, and more hopeful than she'd been in months. Somewhere in the house, she could hear Hartman moving about, starting the day's work despite having been up half the night. She could hear Sarah and Michael's voices, uncertain at first then growing more confident, as Margaret coaxed them to eat breakfast. Thomas's fever continued to burn. By noon, Elena had stopped counting the hours. Time had become meaningless, measured only in Thomas's labored breaths, in the cool cloths she pressed to his forehead, in the small sips of medicine she forced between his lips. Please, she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was talking to anymore. Not to any god she'd once believed in. Maybe to James, wherever he was. Maybe to Thomas himself. Please don't leave me. You're all I have left of your father. Please. Hartman appeared in the doorway, his frame filling it much as it had filled the general store doorway yesterday. Was it only yesterday? It felt like years had passed. Any change? No. He nodded, then crossed to the window and looked out at his land, all that empty, beautiful, useless land. Catherine died quickly, he said after a moment. The smoke probably took her before the flames, but Anna was in a back room. She might have lived longer, might have suffered more. I don't know. I never wanted to know. He turned to face Elena. I tell you this because I understand what you're going through, the not knowing, the helplessness, the rage at a world that can take everything and give nothing back. How did you survive it? I didn't. Not really. Hartman's smile was bitter. I'm still here, but I'm not sure that counts as surviving. I built this place thinking it would matter, thinking success would fill the hole they left. It doesn't. Nothing does. Then why help us? If nothing matters, why not just let us starve in town? Hartman was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Because even if I can't save what I lost, maybe I can save this. Save you. Save your boy. Maybe that's not enough, but it's something. And something is better than standing by and watching while another child dies. Elena looked at this broken man standing in his empty house, offering her the only thing he had left. Hope that wasn't quite hope. Help that was really penance. Kindness that was really desperation. And she understood that they were the same, she and Caleb Hartman, two people destroyed by loss, trying to find some way to keep breathing. Thank you, she said simply. The words were inadequate, but Hartman nodded as if they were enough. As afternoon shadows grew long across the bedroom floor, something changed. Thomas stirred in Elena's arms, his movement different than the restless thrashing of fever. His eyes opened, truly opened, and focused on her face. Mama? The word was barely a whisper, hoarse and weak, but it was the most beautiful sound Elena had ever heard. I'm here, baby. Mama's here. Margaret appeared as if summoned, pressing her hand to Thomas's forehead. Her expression shifted, and for the first time, Elena saw hope in the older woman's eyes. The fever's breaking. Elena pulled Thomas closer, tears streaming down her face. Are you sure? Feel for yourself. Elena pressed her palm to her son's forehead and felt the difference. Still warm, but not the terrifying burn that had consumed him. His breathing came easier. His eyes stayed focused. Thirsty, Thomas whispered. Margaret handed Elena sugar water, and this time when Elena held the cup to Thomas's lips, he drank without choking, keeping it down. He's going to make it, Margaret said, her voice thick. That stubborn little fighter is going to make it. Elena couldn't speak through her tears, could only hold her son and rock him gently while relief and exhaustion and something like joy crashed over her in waves. Somewhere behind her she heard Hartman's boots on the wooden floor, heard him leave the room quietly, but she couldn't turn, couldn't let go of Thomas to acknowledge what he'd done. That evening, with Thomas sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, Elena finally left the bedroom. She found Hartman on the front porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. Sarah and Michael were visible in the yard with Margaret, chasing chickens and laughing, their bellies full and their faces clean. Elena stood beside Hartman, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. He's sleeping, she finally said. Good. Because of you. Because he's strong. Because you're strong. No. Elena turned to face him. Because you stepped into that store. Because you refused to look away. Because you saved us when nobody else would. Hartman's jaw tightened. I didn't save anyone. I couldn't stand there and watch. Not again. You did save us. All of us. Elena paused, then asked the question that had been building since yesterday. What happens now? Now? When Thomas is well enough. When we leave. What happens when we go back to town? Hartman's expression darkened. You can't go back. You know that. Henderson will still refuse you credit. The other women will still judge you. You'll be right back where you were, except Thomas will be stronger, and your children will remember what it feels like to eat regularly. It'll be crueler than if I'd never interfered. Then what am I supposed to do? Hartman was silent for a long time, his eyes on the horizon. When he spoke, his words came slowly, carefully, as if he was testing each one. Stay. What? Stay here. You and your children. The house is too big for just me and Margaret. Your children need food and safety. Thomas needs time to fully recover. And he stopped, then pushed forward. And maybe we both need something to fill the silence. Elena stared at him. You're asking me to stay? To live here? I'm asking you to consider it, not as charity. You'd work. Margaret needs help with the house, the cooking, the 1,000 things that running a ranch requires. Your children would be fed, safe, educated, and you wouldn't have to go back to that town and those people who've already decided you're not worth saving. People would talk. Let them talk. They'd say terrible things about both of us. They already say terrible things about both of us. Hartman's voice was flat. I'm the hermit who let his family burn. You're the widow who couldn't keep her husband sober. We're already condemned. At least this way, your children eat. The brutal honesty should have stung, but Elena found herself appreciating it. No false promises, no pretty lies, just truth, laid out plain. Why would you do this? Hartman turned to look at her fully, and Elena saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. Because that house is full of ghosts, and I'm tired of being alone with them. Because your children laugh, and I haven't heard laughter in 6 years. Because maybe, if I can help you build a life here, it'll mean something. It'll mean Catherine and Anna didn't die for nothing. That's a heavy burden to place on strangers. Yes, but I'm asking anyway. Elena looked out at the ranch, at the solid stone house that would never burn, at the green pastures stretching toward hills, at her children playing without fear or hunger. She thought about returning to town, to the one-room shack she could barely afford, to the judgmental stares and the impossible task of feeding 3 children on $1 a week. She thought about her pride, about what people would say, about proper behavior and respectability, and all the things she'd been taught mattered. Then she looked at Sarah chasing chickens with a genuine smile on her face, and the decision became simple. All right, she said quietly. We'll stay, but not as charity. I work for our keep. We earn our place here. Something shifted in Hartman's expression. Not quite relief, but close to it. Agreed. They stood on the porch as darkness fell complete. 2 broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their respective losses, and made a bargain that would change everything. Neither of them knew that in town wheels were already turning, that Elena's brother-in-law, Victor Moore, had heard about Caleb Hartman's intervention at the general store, that Victor, who'd been sniffing around since James died, asking questions about the children and their care, had decided it was time to act. Neither of them knew that the respite they'd found was temporary, that the real fight was just beginning. For now they had this moment, this quiet evening with children playing and Thomas breathing easy and something like peace settling over the ranch. It wouldn't last. Peace never did. But for tonight it was enough. 3 weeks passed with a rhythm that felt almost like normalcy. Elena woke before dawn each day to help Margaret prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent her mornings tending the house and garden, her afternoons helping with laundry and mending. Thomas grew stronger by the day, his color returning, his laughter echoing through rooms that hadn't heard a child's joy in 6 years. Sarah learned to gather eggs without fear, and Michael followed Caleb around the ranch like a devoted shadow, absorbing every word about horses and cattle and the land. Elena found herself watching Caleb more than she meant to. The way he moved with quiet efficiency, never wasting motion or words. The way his face softened when Michael asked questions, showing patience she'd rarely seen in men. The way he sat on the porch each evening after the work was done, staring at the horizon as if searching for something he'd never find. They didn't talk much beyond practical matters, which fence needed mending, whether to buy more chickens, how Thomas's cough was improving. But there was understanding in the silence, a recognition that some losses were too deep for words. On the 22nd day, a rider appeared at midday. Elena was hanging laundry when she saw the dust cloud approaching. Something in her chest tightened with instinctive dread. Visitors meant the outside world intruding on the fragile peace they'd built, meant questions and judgment and all the things she'd escaped. The rider was young, barely 20, wearing a deputy's badge that looked too large on his thin chest. He dismounted awkwardly and approached the house where Caleb stood on the porch, having emerged at the sound of hoofbeats. "Mr. Hartman, sir, I have a summons." Caleb's expression didn't change, but Elena saw his shoulders tense. "For who?" "Mrs. Elena Moore. Legal matter concerning custody of her children." The deputy pulled a folded paper from his jacket, his hands shaking slightly. "She's required to appear before Judge Whitmore in 3 days. Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock. Elena's hands stilled on the wet sheet she'd been hanging. The world seemed to tilt sideways, everything going sharp and bright with fear. "Custody?" Caleb's voice remained calm, but something dangerous edged into it. "On whose petition?" "Victor Moore, sir, the children's uncle. He's filed for emergency custody on grounds of—" The deputy glanced at the paper, clearly uncomfortable. "On grounds of maternal unfitness and immoral living conditions." The words hit Elena like physical blows. She released the sheet and walked toward the porch, her legs somehow still working despite the terror flooding through her. "That's a lie," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Victor has never cared about those children. He didn't even attend James's funeral." The deputy wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm just delivering the summons, ma'am. You need to appear, or the judge will rule in absentia." "She'll appear." Caleb took the paper, his jaw tight. "Tell Judge Whitmore Mrs. Moore will be present with counsel." "Yes, sir. I'll tell him." The deputy practically fled back to his horse, relieved to escape the tension crackling in the air. They watched him ride away in silence. Sarah and Michael had stopped playing in the yard, their faces frightened. Thomas clung to Margaret's skirts, sensing the adult fear even if he didn't understand it. "Victor," Elena said finally, the name tasting like poison. "James's brother. He's only after money." "What money?" Caleb's voice was carefully neutral. "You said James left nothing but debts." "He didn't. But there's a small trust, $100 James's mother left for the children's education. It's not much, but Victor knows about it. He tried to access it after James died, claimed as next of kin he should manage it. The bank refused because I'm still their legal guardian." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "So now he's trying to take the children to get the money." "There's more to it than that," Margaret said quietly from the doorway. $100 isn't worth a legal fight. What else does he want?" Elena's face went pale. "Revenge. Victor blamed me for James's drinking, said if I'd been a better wife, James wouldn't have needed to drown his sorrows. When I refused to marry him after James died—" "He asked you to marry him?" Caleb's voice went flat, dangerous. 2 weeks after the funeral. Said it was the Christian thing to do, that I needed a man to guide me and the children. When I refused, he threatened to make my life difficult." Elena's laugh was bitter. "I thought he just meant gossip. I didn't think he'd try to take my children." Caleb stared at the horizon for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was controlled but hard as iron. "He won't succeed. You don't know that. He's James's blood family. I'm just their mother, and the law doesn't always value that. Add in what people are saying about me living here, unmarried, with you." Elena's voice cracked. "The judge will believe I'm unfit. He'll give Victor custody, and I'll lose them." "No." Caleb turned to face her fully. "You won't. Because we're going to fight this properly. Margaret, ride into town and fetch Samuel Warren. Tell him I need him here today." "The doctor?" Elena asked, confused. "Samuel was a lawyer before he became a doctor. Best legal mind in 3 territories. He gave it up after his daughter died. Said he couldn't stomach courtrooms anymore, but he owes me favors. He'll help." Margaret was already moving toward the stables. Sarah and Michael crept closer to Elena, their small hands reaching for hers. "Mama, are we in trouble?" Sarah's voice was small, frightened. Elena knelt and pulled both children close, forcing her voice to stay steady. "No, sweetheart. There's just some grown-up business we need to handle. But everything will be all right." The lie felt heavy on her tongue, but she couldn't burden them with the truth, that everything was very much not all right, that the temporary safety they'd found was already crumbling. Dr. Warren arrived before sunset, riding hard and looking annoyed about it. He was a lean man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and the kind of permanent frown that came from seeing too much human suffering. "This better be important, Caleb. I had 3 patients waiting." "It's important." Caleb handed him the summons. Warren read it quickly, his frown deepening. "Victor Moore. I know him. Drinks at the saloon every Saturday. Gambles poorly. Works odd jobs when he's sober enough. He's claiming unfitness? Apparently my living here with Mr. Hartman constitutes immoral conditions, Elena said, lifting her chin despite the shame burning in her chest. Never mind that my children are fed and safe for the first time in months. Warren's sharp eyes assessed her. Are you and Caleb involved romantically? No. Elena's face flushed. I work here. I earn my keep. There's nothing improper. I believe you, but what you and I know doesn't matter. It's what Victor can make Judge Whitmore believe. Warren moved to the porch railing, his lawyer's mind clearly working. Whitmore is conservative, religious, susceptible to social pressure. He'll be influenced by what the town's respectable women tell him, and we both know what they're saying. So what do we do? Caleb asked. Warren was quiet for a long moment, studying both of them with clinical detachment. When he spoke, his words were careful, measured. The strongest defense against claims of impropriety would be marriage. If you and Caleb were legally wed, Victor's entire case collapses. The children would be in a traditional family structure, financially secure, with an upstanding stepfather. Whitmore couldn't rule against that without looking biased. The suggestion fell into the space between them like a stone into still water, rippling outward in widening circles of implication. Absolutely not, Elena said immediately. I won't trap Mr. Hartman into marriage to solve my problems. It's unconscionable. It's practical, Warren countered, and it's the surest way to protect your children. There has to be another way. There are other ways. None is certain. Warren turned to Caleb. What do you think? Caleb stood motionless, his face carved from stone. Elena couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if he was horrified by the suggestion or merely considering it as another business arrangement. Give us a moment, Caleb said finally. Alone, Warren nodded and withdrew into the house. Elena stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs, unsure whether she wanted Caleb to reject the idea immediately or what? Consider it? The thought of marriage felt like a betrayal of James's memory, but James was 3 months dead and Victor was very much alive and threatening everything. Elena? Caleb's voice was quiet. Look at me. She forced herself to meet his eyes. If we did this, he said carefully, it would be a legal arrangement, nothing more. You'd keep your own room. There would be no expectations beyond what already exists, you helping Margaret with the house, the children being raised here safely. The only difference would be a piece of paper that says we're married. That's not fair to you. Fair? Caleb's laugh was harsh. I've been living in this house alone for 6 years, surrounded by ghosts. Your children brought life back to it. I hear Michael's questions and Sarah's laughter and Thomas's footsteps. And for the first time since the fire, this place feels like something other than a tomb. You think protecting that is unfair to me? But marriage would be in name only, a legal protection for you and the children. I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give. He paused, then added quietly, I buried my heart with Catherine and Anna. I'm not looking to replace them. But I can offer you this, safety, security, a home where your children can grow up without fear. Isn't that worth a marriage of convenience? Elena's throat tightened. It was the most he'd spoken at once since she'd met him, and every word carried the weight of truth. He wasn't offering love or romance or anything that would require her to betray James's memory. He was offering protection, pure and simple. What if you meet someone? What if you want? I won't. The certainty in his voice was absolute. That part of my life died in the fire. This would be enough. Elena thought about Victor getting custody, about her children being raised by a drunk who saw them as meal tickets rather than people. She thought about going back to town, to starvation and judgment and watching her children suffer. She thought about the past 3 weeks, the first time in months she'd slept without fear, the first time her children had laughed freely, the first time she'd felt something other than crushing despair. If we do this, she said slowly, it's permanent. Divorce would be worse than never marrying. We'd be bound together legally, even if not. She couldn't finish the sentence. I understand. And people will say terrible things about both of us. They already do. Your reputation doesn't matter more than those children's safety. Caleb's voice was firm. Make your decision based on what you need, Elena, not on what you think you owe me or what people will say. Can you live with this arrangement? Can you raise your children here, build a life here, with me as your husband, in name, if not in fact? Elena closed her eyes. When she opened them, she'd made her choice. Yes, if you're certain. I'm certain. They stood facing each other on the porch, two people about to bind their lives together for all the wrong reasons and all the right ones, and Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Everything was changing, had already changed, and there was no going back. Warren returned at Caleb's call, looking unsurprised by their decision. "When?" he asked simply. "Tomorrow," Caleb said, "before Victor can file additional motions. Can you arrange it?" "I can. Judge Whitmore performs civil ceremonies. I'll need witnesses. Margaret can serve as one. I'll find another." Warren's expression was carefully neutral. "You understand this will cause talk." "Let them talk," Elena said, echoing Caleb's earlier words. "As long as my children are safe, I don't care what anyone says." Warren nodded slowly. "Then I'll make the arrangements. Be ready by noon tomorrow. And Caleb," he paused, "this is a legal contract. Make sure you both understand the implications." "We do." After Warren left, Elena found Margaret in the kitchen, preparing dinner with her usual efficiency. The older woman looked up as Elena entered, her expression knowing. "He asked you to marry him. You knew he would?" "I suggested it 2 weeks ago, told him it was the practical solution to prevent exactly this kind of legal challenge." Margaret chopped carrots with sharp, precise movements. "Caleb's not stupid. He knew Victor or someone like him would eventually cause trouble. A woman living here unwed, with children. It was only a matter of time before the gossips weaponized it. You don't think it's wrong, using marriage this way?" Margaret set down her knife and looked at Elena directly. "I think marriage is what you make of it. I was married to a good man for 30 years. We had love, children, a real partnership. When he died, I thought that was the end of the good parts of my life. Then I came here to work for Caleb, and I found a different kind of family. Not the same, but good in its own way." She paused. "You and Caleb are making an honest bargain. You both know what you're getting. That's more than a lot of love matches can claim." "But what about love? What about it? Love doesn't keep children fed. Love doesn't protect them from men like Victor Moore. Love didn't save my boy from pneumonia or Caleb's family from fire or your husband from drink." Margaret's voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel. "You want love. Read novels. You want security for those children. Marry Caleb tomorrow and don't look back." The words should have been harsh, but instead they felt like permission. Permission to be practical, to choose survival over sentiment, to do what needed doing without guilt. That night, Elena lay awake in her room, listening to her children's peaceful breathing from the next room. Tomorrow, she would marry a man she barely knew. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Caleb Hartman. Tomorrow, everything would change again, but her children would be safe, and that was worth any sacrifice. The ceremony took place in Judge Whitmore's chambers at noon, attended by Margaret, Dr. Warren, and the judge's clerk as witnesses. Elena wore her best dress, patched and faded but clean, and Caleb wore a dark suit that looked uncomfortable on his large frame. Judge Whitmore performed the ceremony with brisk efficiency, clearly disapproving but unable to refuse when both parties were willing, and Dr. Warren stood as witness. The words were standard, impersonal, carrying none of the romance or joy that weddings were supposed to hold. "Do you, Caleb Hartman, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Elena Moore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Texas, I pronounce you husband and wife." Whitmore's expression was pinched, sour. "You may kiss the bride, though I suspect that's not part of this particular arrangement." Caleb ignored the judge's snide comment. He turned to Elena, and for a moment their eyes met, two strangers who'd just bound their lives together, neither quite sure what came next. "Thank you," Elena whispered. "Don't thank me yet. We still have Tuesday's hearing." The hearing. Elena had almost forgotten in the rush of the wedding. Victor's petition was still active, though their marriage would undermine his entire case. They signed the papers, accepted the certificate, and walked out into the bright noon sun as husband and wife. A few townspeople stopped to stare, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust to prurient curiosity. "Well," Margaret said as they climbed into the wagon, "that's done. Now let's get home before the gossips' heads explode." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Elena twisted the simple gold band Caleb had produced, his mother's ring, he'd said briefly, the only jewelry he had. It felt heavy on her finger, weighted with implications she didn't want to examine too closely. Sarah and Michael were waiting on the porch when they arrived, bouncing with questions. "Mama, why did you go to town without us? Are we in trouble still? When's dinner? I'm hungry." Elena knelt and pulled them close, breathing in their little child smell of sunshine and dust and innocence. "Everything's fine. Mr. Hartman and we got married today." "That means he's your stepfather now, and this is our home, all of us together." Sarah's eyes went wide. "Like a real family?" The question pierced Elena's heart. "Yes, sweetheart, like a real family." Michael looked up at Caleb with solemn eyes. "Does that mean I can call you Papa?" Caleb's expression didn't change, but Elena saw something flicker in his eyes, pain or longing or both. "If you want to." "Okay, Papa." Michael said it as easily as that, accepting this strange new configuration without question, the way children did. That evening, after the children were in bed, Elena and Caleb sat on the porch as had become their habit. The silence between them felt different now, charged with the strange intimacy of legal binding without emotional connection. "I meant what I said," Caleb spoke without looking at her. "This doesn't change anything between us. You keep your room, I keep mine. We're partners in raising those children, nothing more." "I know." "Good." He paused. "But Elena, when we go to that hearing on Tuesday, we need to present as a real married couple. United. Whitmore will be looking for cracks, for any sign this is a sham. We need to convince him it's genuine." "How do we do that?" "Small things. Sitting together, me putting my hand on your shoulder, you calling me by my given name instead of Mr. Hartman. Little gestures that suggest comfort and partnership." He finally turned to look at her. "Can you do that? Convincingly?" Elena thought about the stakes, her children's safety, their future, everything that mattered. "Yes, I can do that. Then we'll be ready." Tuesday arrived too quickly. Elena dressed with care, her hands shaking as she buttoned her dress. Caleb wore his suit again, and together they loaded the children into the wagon for the ride to town. The courthouse was packed. Elena felt the weight of dozens of eyes as they entered. The respectable women from the general store, their husbands, townspeople who'd come to witness the spectacle. Victor sat at the front with a lawyer Elena didn't recognize, his expression smug and certain. He was a smaller, meaner version of James. Same dark hair, same blue eyes, but where James had been gentle even in his weakness, Victor carried a cruel edge that showed in every line of his face. He smiled when he saw Elena, and it wasn't friendly. Judge Whitmore entered, and everyone rose. The hearing began with Victor's lawyer presenting the petition, claims of maternal unfitness, assertions that Elena was living in sin with a man she barely knew, suggestions that the children were being exposed to immoral influences. "Mr. Moore has grave concerns about his late brother's children," the lawyer intoned. Mistress Elena Moore, by her own admission, had no means to support these children. She was reduced to begging in the streets, allowing her youngest child to nearly die from neglect. When a wealthy rancher offered her employment, she moved herself and her children into his home, unmarried and unchaperoned, creating a scandalous living situation wholly inappropriate for innocent children. Elena felt her face burn, but Caleb's hand found hers under the table, squeezing once. Steady, grounding. Dr. Warren stood. "Your Honor, if I may address these spurious claims, Mrs. Moore's financial difficulties were the direct result of debts left by her late husband, debts that Mr. Victor Moore made no effort to assist with, despite being family. When her youngest child fell desperately ill, it was Mr. Caleb Hartman who provided medical care that saved the boy's life. And as for the living situation," Warren produced the marriage certificate with a flourish. "Mrs. Moore is now Mrs. Hartman, legally wed as of 4 days ago. There is nothing scandalous about a woman living with her husband. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Victor's face went red, then white. His lawyer scrambled for composure. Your Honor, this marriage is clearly a sham, entered into solely to defeat this petition. Can you prove that? Warren's voice was sharp as a blade. Do you have evidence that this marriage is anything other than what it appears? Two adults making a legal commitment? The timing is suspicious. The timing is irrelevant. They are legally married. The children are in a stable home with two parents, adequate food, medical care, and education. What exactly is Mr. Moore's objection? Victor stood abruptly, his voice loud and harsh. My objection is that woman destroyed my brother. She nagged him into drink, drove him to his grave, and now she's latched onto another man for his money. Those children deserve better than a gold digger for a mother. The courtroom went silent. Elena felt the words hit like stones, each one finding its target. Caleb's hand tightened on hers, and she felt him starting to rise, but Dr. Warren was faster. Mr. Moore, you claim Mrs. Hartman drove your brother to drink. Yet by multiple witness accounts, James Moore had problems with alcohol long before his marriage. You claim she's a gold digger, yet she spent 3 months in poverty rather than accepting financial help from any number of men who offered it. You claim to care about these children, yet you made no attempt to help them when they were starving. Warren's voice cut through the room like winter wind. The only person I see acting out of financial interest here is you, sir. Isn't it true you attempted to access the children's trust fund after your brother's death? Victor's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The whispers grew louder. Isn't it also true, Warren continued, that you proposed marriage to Mrs. Hartman barely 2 weeks after your brother's funeral, and when she refused, you threatened to make her life difficult? I was trying to help her. By forcing her into marriage. How charitable. Warren turned to the judge. Your Honor, this petition is clearly motivated by financial greed, not concern for the children's welfare. Mr. Moore sees his brother's children as a meal ticket, nothing more. I move for immediate dismissal. Judge Whitmore looked from Warren to Victor to Elena and Caleb, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched out, taut as wire. Mrs. Hartman, the judge said finally, stand, please. Elena rose on shaking legs, Caleb standing with her, his hand still holding hers. You love these children? More than my own life, Your Honor. And you, Mr. Hartman, you've taken on another man's children, accepted responsibility for their care and upbringing. Why? Caleb's answer was simple, direct. Because they needed someone and I could help. Because a man who has the means to protect children and doesn't do it isn't much of a man. Whitmore nodded slowly, then looked at Victor with undisguised contempt. Mr. Moore, I find your petition to be without merit. These children are in a stable home with adequate care. Your claims of unfitness are unsupported by evidence. Furthermore, your attempt to access their trust fund raises serious questions about your motivations. He banged his gavel. Petition denied. Mrs. Hartman retains full custody. This hearing is concluded. The crack of the gavel was the most beautiful sound Elena had ever heard. The relief that flooded through Elena nearly buckled her knees. Caleb's hand tightened on hers, steady and grounding, the only thing keeping her upright as the courtroom erupted in fresh whispers. Victor shoved back from his table, his chair scraping loud against the wooden floor, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. This isn't over, he hissed as he passed their table, his voice low enough that only they could hear. You think you've won. You've just made everything worse for yourself. Dr. Warren stepped between them before Caleb could respond, his body blocking Victor's path. The hearing is concluded, Mr. Moore. I suggest you leave before you say something actionable. Victor's lawyer grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. The crowd parted to let them through, some faces showing satisfaction, others disappointment that the spectacle had ended so quickly. Mrs. Henderson and her friends wore matching expressions of pinched disapproval, as if the judge's ruling had personally offended them. Elena didn't care. Her children were safe. That was all that mattered. Outside the courthouse, the September sun blazed overhead, too bright and cheerful for the darkness of what had just transpired. Sarah and Michael waited in the wagon with Margaret, their faces anxious until they saw Elena emerge. Sarah's smile broke across her face like sunrise. Mama, can we go home now? Home. The words settled into Elena's chest with unexpected warmth. The ranch had become home in the 6 weeks since she'd first arrived. Not just shelter, but the place where her children laughed freely, where meals appeared regularly, where fear had slowly loosened its grip on all of them. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going home." The ride back was quieter than the ride there had been. Margaret held Thomas in her lap, the boy drowsing in the afternoon heat, his health fully restored. Sarah and Michael chattered about the baby chicks that had hatched that morning, their voices bright with the resilience of children who didn't fully understand what they'd just escaped. Caleb drove with his usual economy of movement, his face unreadable. Elena studied his profile, the strong jaw, the lines around his eyes, the mouth set in that perpetual, almost frown. This man was her husband now, legally bound to her, and she knew almost nothing about him beyond his grief and his unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she said quietly, pitched for his ears only. "Don't thank me yet." Victor meant what he said. This isn't over. What more can he do? The judge ruled on custody. But Victor's angry and humiliated, and men like that don't just accept defeat. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. "We need to be careful. Keep the children close. Watch for trouble." Elena wanted to argue that they were being paranoid, that Victor would slink away and leave them alone, but the memory of his face, that twisted mask of rage, killed the words before they formed. Caleb was right. This wasn't over. The first 2 weeks after the hearing passed with deceptive calm. The ranch settled into its rhythms, harvest time approaching, cattle being moved to different pastures, preparations for winter already beginning. Elena threw herself into the work, helping Margaret preserve vegetables, mend clothes, prepare for the cold months ahead. The children thrived, growing brown from the sun, their laughter a constant backdrop to the daily routine. At night, Elena and Caleb maintained their careful distance, occupying separate rooms, their marriage existing only in the legal documents locked in Caleb's study. They spoke of practical matters, supplies needed, tasks completed, the children's progress with their letters. They didn't speak of the strangeness of their arrangement, of the gossip that surely still swirled through town, of the way Margaret sometimes looked at them with an expression Elena couldn't quite interpret. It was Margaret who noticed the first sign of trouble. "Someone's been watching the ranch," she said one morning as Elena kneaded bread dough. "I've seen a rider on that ridge to the east. 3 times now, always at dawn, just sitting there looking down at the house." Elena's hands stilled in the dough. "Could it be one of the ranch hands?" "Our men are all accounted for. This is someone else." Margaret's face was grim. "I told Caleb yesterday. He's taking precautions." "What kind of precautions?" "The kind that involve keeping a rifle loaded by the door and telling the hands to watch for strangers." Margaret covered the bread with a cloth, her movements sharp with tension. "I've lived through range wars and cattle rustlers and all manner of trouble. I know the feel of violence building. This has that feel." Elena wanted to dismiss Margaret's concerns as overblown, but she couldn't. Not with Victor's threat still echoing in her memory, not with the way her instincts prickled whenever she thought about the hearing. That afternoon, while the children napped, Elena found Caleb in the barn repairing tack. He looked up as she entered, his hands continuing their work even as his attention shifted to her. "Margaret told me about the rider." "Figured she would." Caleb tested the repaired bridle, pulled it taut. "Could be nothing, could be someone passing through." "But you don't think it is?" "No." He set down the bridle and faced her fully. "I think Victor's planning something. I don't know what, but I can feel it coming like a storm on the horizon." "What do we do?" "We stay vigilant, keep the children close. Don't go anywhere alone." He paused. "And you learn to shoot." Elena blinked. "What?" "A rifle. You need to know how to use one, just in case." Caleb moved to a cabinet against the barn wall, pulled out a Winchester repeater. "I should have taught you weeks ago. If anything happens and I'm not here, you need to be able to protect yourself and the children." The weight of the rifle in her hands felt foreign and frightening. Elena had never held a gun before, never imagined needing to. But looking at Caleb's serious expression, thinking about Victor's rage, she understood this wasn't paranoia. This was necessity. They spent an hour behind the barn, Caleb teaching her the basics: how to load, how to aim, how to brace for the recoil. Elena's first shots went wide, the kick of the rifle surprising her, but by the end of the lesson she could at least hit the fence post they were using as a target. "You're a natural," Caleb said, and Elena couldn't tell if he was being kind or honest. "I hate that I need to learn this." "I know, but hate it or not, you need the skill." He took the rifle back, checked the chamber. Catherine never learned. I tried to teach her once, but she refused. Said guns were men's business. His voice went distant. The night of the fire, she had no way to defend herself or Anna. If she'd had a rifle, maybe she could have broken through a window, created an escape. Maybe... He stopped, shook his head. "Maybe nothing, but I won't make that mistake twice. You'll know how to protect yourself." Elena watched him walk back toward the barn, shoulders tight with old grief, and understood that every lesson he taught her, every precaution he took, was driven by the ghosts of his failures. He was trying to save his wife and daughter, retroactively, by saving her and her children now. It was both heartbreaking and deeply generous, and Elena found herself grateful for this strange man who'd become her husband in name and her protector in fact. The attack came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the hearing. Caleb was out riding the western fence line with two of his hands, checking for breaks before the autumn storms hit. Margaret had gone to town for supplies, planning to return before dark. Elena was in the kitchen with the children, preparing dinner, when she heard horses approaching fast. Too many of them. Her first thought was that Caleb had returned early, but when she looked out the window, her blood turned to ice. 6 men rode into the yard, Victor among them. The others were strangers, rough-looking men with the air of hired muscle, the kind who could be found in any saloon willing to do work that decent men wouldn't touch. Elena's mind raced. The rifle was by the front door where Caleb kept it loaded. The children were behind her in the kitchen. The nearest ranch hand was in the south pasture, too far to hear if she screamed. "Sarah," she said, keeping her voice calm despite the terror flooding her veins, "take your brothers upstairs to your room. Lock the door. Shut. Don't come out until I say it's safe." "Mama! Now, Sarah, quickly!" Something in her tone made Sarah grab Michael and Thomas's hands and run for the stairs. Elena waited until she heard the lock click, then moved toward the front door, toward the rifle. She was 3 steps away when Victor kicked the door open. Well, the little gold digger is home alone." Victor's breath reeked of whiskey, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. "Where's your rich husband, Elena? Off counting his money while his whore plays house?" Elena forced herself to stay calm, to not look at the rifle leaning against the wall just out of reach. "You're trespassing, Victor. Leave now, or I'll have you arrested." "You'll have me arrested?" Victor laughed, harsh and ugly. "You think anyone in this territory will lift a finger to help you? You're nothing. You were nothing when you married my brother, and you're nothing now except a pretty face that caught a lonely man's eye." The other men filed in behind him, spreading out through the room like wolves. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you want?" "What's mine?" Victor moved closer, and Elena smelled the whiskey stronger now, saw the madness in his eyes. "James's children, that trust fund, and a little payback for humiliating me in court." "The judge gave me custody. You can't I?" Victor gestured to the men behind him. "These fine gentlemen disagree. See, we're going to take those children, and we're going to leave a note saying you ran off with some drifter, abandoned them. Your husband will be heartbroken, of course, but he'll realize what everyone else already knows. You're unfit to be a mother. The children will end up with me, and nobody will question it." "That's insane. Caleb will know I didn't abandon them. He'll hunt you down." "Will he? By the time he figures out what really happened, we'll be in Kansas. Those kids will tell whatever story I teach them to tell, or they'll regret it." Victor's smile was cruel. Children are easy to control when you know how to apply the right pressure. The threat to her children snapped something inside Elena. She lunged for the rifle, her fingers closing around the barrel. But one of Victor's men was faster. He grabbed her arm and twisted, pain shooting through her shoulder. The rifle clattered to the floor. "Feisty," the man said, his breath hot against her ear. "Maybe we should teach her some manners before we take the kids." "Do what you want with her," Victor said dismissively. "Just make sure she can't follow us, and make it look like she left voluntarily." Elena fought, kicking and clawing, but there were too many of them. One man held her arms while another tied her hands with rough rope that bit into her wrists. She screamed, hoping someone would hear, but the ranch hands were scattered across the property, and Margaret wouldn't return for hours. "Where are the brats?" Victor headed for the stairs. "No!" Elena thrashed against her captors. "Leave them alone. You can have the money, all of it. Just don't hurt them." "Too late for deals, Elena." Victor's boots thudded on the stairs. "You should have thought about this before you turned me down." The sound of Sarah's door being kicked open echoed through the house, followed by her daughter's scream. Elena heard Michael crying, heard Thomas wailing in fear, and something primal and desperate tore loose in her chest. She bit down hard on the hand covering her mouth, tasting blood. The man swore and jerked back, and in that moment of loosened grip, Elena drove her elbow into his stomach. He doubled over, and she stumbled toward the stairs, still bound but moving, driven by pure maternal fury. She made it 3 steps before someone grabbed her hair and yanked her backwards. She fell hard, her head cracking against the floor, stars exploding across her vision. "Tie her to a chair," one of the men ordered, "and gag her. I'm tired of the screaming." Through the ringing in her ears, Elena heard her children crying upstairs, heard Victor's voice promising them candy if they came along quietly, heard Sarah shouting, "No! We want Mama! We want Papa Caleb!" Papa Caleb. The words pierced through Elena's haze of pain and fear. Sarah had claimed him, had given him the title that meant family and safety and protection. And he wasn't here. He was out riding fences while these monsters terrorized his family. Elena was hauled upright and shoved into a chair, her hands still bound behind her. Someone produced a dirty rag and tied it around her mouth, the taste of it making her gag. She fought against the ropes, against the men, against her own helplessness, but it was useless. Victor came down the stairs carrying Thomas, the toddler sobbing and reaching back toward the stairs. Michael followed, held by another man, his face streaked with tears. Sarah came last, struggling against her captor's grip, her small fists beating uselessly against his arm. "Mama!" Sarah's voice broke. "Mama, help us!" Elena made desperate sounds against the gag, tears streaming down her face, her whole body straining toward her children. "Touching," Victor said mockingly. "Say goodbye to your mama, kids. You won't be seeing her again." "You'll hang for this," Elena tried to say, but the gag turned it into muffled noise. "No, I won't. Because nobody will believe you over me. James's grieving brother, forced to take custody when his sister-in-law ran off? I'm the hero in this story." Victor moved toward the door, Thomas still crying in his arms. "Burn the house when you're done with her. Make it look like an accident. Tragic fire. Poor woman didn't escape. Very sad." The words hit Elena like ice water. They weren't just taking her children. They were going to kill her and destroy any evidence of what really happened. The men holding her started dragging the chair toward the fireplace, arguing about the best way to stage the scene. Elena bucked and twisted, fighting with everything she had, but bound and gagged, she was helpless. "This is how I die," she thought with crystalline clarity. "This is how it ends. Victor takes my children, burns me alive, and nobody ever knows the truth." Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, fast and getting closer. The men heard it too. They froze, exchanged glances. "That'll be the husband," one of them said. "We need to go, now." "What about her?" "Leave her. The fire will handle it. Come on." They dropped Elena's chair with a crash that sent pain shooting through her shoulder where she hit the floor. The room erupted in chaos, men running for the door, horses being mounted, Victor shouting orders. Elena heard Caleb's voice ring out across the yard, hard as iron and cold as winter. "Put down those children, now." "Or what, Hartman? You're 1 man against 6. You really want to die for another man's brats?" "I'll die protecting my family. Question is whether you're willing to die stealing them." The sound of a rifle being cocked echoed across the yard. Then another, and another. "That's 3 rifles pointed at your head, Victor." Caleb's voice was deadly calm. "My 2 best men and me. We all qualified as sharpshooters in the Army. At this range, we don't miss. So I'll ask again, put down those children or find out what happens when you threaten a man's family?" "You're bluffing. Try me." The silence stretched out, taut as a bowstring. Elena couldn't see what was happening, couldn't move from where she'd fallen, could only listen and pray. Then Victor's voice, shaking with rage. "Fine, take the brats, but this isn't over, Hartman. You've made an enemy today." "I've had enemies before. They don't scare me. But if you ever come near my wife or my children again, I won't bother with sheriffs or judges. I'll end you myself. That's not a threat. That's a promise." Elena heard footsteps running, heard horses being spurred into flight. Then Caleb was there, bursting through the door, his face white with fury and fear. He saw Elena on the floor, bound and gagged, and something terrible flashed in his eyes. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he untied the gag and cut the ropes binding her wrists. Elena, are you hurt? Did they—" He couldn't finish the question. "The children," Elena gasped, her throat raw. "Where are the children?" "Safe. Outside with Tom and Daniel. They're safe." Elena tried to stand and her legs wouldn't hold her. Caleb caught her, his arms coming around her, and she collapsed against his chest, shaking with reaction and relief and terror at how close they'd come to disaster. "I couldn't reach the rifle," she said through tears. "I tried, but there were too many of them. They were going to burn the house with me inside. They were going to take my babies, and I couldn't stop them." "Shh, it's over. You're safe. The children are safe." Caleb's hand cupped the back of her head, careful of the lump forming where she'd hit the floor. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm so damned sorry. You came. You saved them." Elena pulled back to look at his face, saw the raw emotion there, fear and rage and something deeper she couldn't name. "How did you know?" "Tom saw the riders heading this way. We rode hard, got back just as they were loading the children onto horses." His jaw clenched. "If we'd been 5 minutes later—" "But you weren't. You were here. You kept your promise." Elena's hands fisted in his shirt. "You said you'd protect us, and you did." "Mama!" Sarah's voice rang from outside, desperate and frightened. "Go to them," Caleb said, helping Elena to her feet. "They need to see you're all right." Elena stumbled to the door and out into the yard. Her children broke away from the ranch hands and ran to her, all three of them colliding with her in a tangle of arms and tears and desperate hugs. "Mama, we were so scared. That bad man took us. I told them Papa Caleb would save us. I told them." Elena sank to her knees and pulled them all close, breathing in their little child smell, feeling their solid warmth, their beating hearts, their aliveness. They were here. They were safe. Nothing else mattered. Caleb stood behind them, his hand resting on Sarah's shoulder, his presence solid and reassuring. The ranch hands, Tom and Daniel, stood with rifles still in hand, their faces grim. "Should we ride after them, boss?" Tom asked. "No, let them go, for now." Caleb's voice was steel wrapped in ice. "But tomorrow, we're riding to the sheriff. This ends legally, not with bloodshed." That night, after the children were finally asleep, all three of them in Elena's room, refusing to let her out of their sight, Elena found Caleb on the porch. He sat in the darkness, a bottle of whiskey beside him, untouched. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Can't stop seeing what could have happened, what almost happened." He stared out at the darkness. "If we'd been later, if Victor had gotten away with them, if they'd hurt you—" His hands clenched on the porch railing. "I lost one family to fire and helplessness. I can't lose another." Elena sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You didn't lose us. You saved us. This time. What about next time?" "There won't be a next time. We'll make sure of it." Elena paused, then said what she'd been thinking since the moment Caleb burst through that door. "You called us your family. You told Victor we were your family." "You are." Caleb's voice was rough. "Maybe this started as a legal arrangement, a marriage of convenience. But those children in there? They're mine now, in every way that matters. And you—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "You're my wife, not just on paper. I know we agreed this would be in name only, but Elena, when I saw you tied up in that chair, saw what they almost did—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Elena understood what he was trying to say because she felt it too. Somewhere in the past few months, This arrangement of convenience had become something real. Not love, not yet, but something deeper than practicality. Partnership, trust. The beginning of something that might, given time, become more. "We're a family," Elena said softly. "However it started, whatever this is, we're a family now. All of us together." Caleb turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, Elena saw the truth in his eyes, the fear he'd felt, the relief, the fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with legal obligations and everything to do with genuine care. "Yes," he said simply. "We are." They sat together in the darkness, two people who'd found each other in grief and desperation, who'd built something real from the ruins of their separate losses. The threat of Victor still loomed, the danger not yet past, but for this moment they had peace. Tomorrow they would face whatever came next. Together, as a family. Dawn broke cold and clear, the kind of Texas morning that promised heat later but started with a chill that made breath visible. Elena woke to find all three children still tangled around her, their small bodies warm and trusting in sleep. Sarah's hand clutched Elena's nightgown. Michael had his face pressed against her shoulder. Thomas curled against her side, his breathing deep and even. She lay still, unwilling to disturb them, watching the pale light creep across the ceiling. Her body ached from yesterday's violence, bruises blooming purple on her wrists where the ropes had bitten, a tender knot on her head where she'd hit the floor, muscles screaming from the fight she'd lost. But her children were safe. That was all that mattered. The sound of boots on the porch told her Caleb was already awake, already moving. Elena carefully extracted herself from the tangle of children and pulled on her wrapper, moving quietly to the door. Caleb stood at the railing, dressed and armed, his rifle leaning against the post beside him. He turned as she emerged, his eyes sweeping over her with an intensity that made her catch her breath. "You should rest more. The children will sleep for hours yet after yesterday." "So should you." Elena moved to stand beside him, mimicking their positions from last night. In daylight, the admission they'd made felt both more real and more fragile. "When did you sleep?" "I didn't." Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact. "Tom and Daniel took shifts watching the house. I stayed with the children's room, making sure no one got past the door." The image of this large, dangerous man sitting guard over her sleeping children made Elena's throat tight. "Thank you. Don't thank me for protecting my own." The words were gruff, but his eyes softened when he looked at her. "How are you, truly?" "Bruised, scared, angry." Elena touched the knot on her head gingerly. "But alive." "We're all alive, and that's enough." "It's not enough." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Victor crossed a line yesterday. Attempted kidnapping, assault, conspiracy to commit murder. He won't stop unless we stop him permanently." "What are you suggesting?" "The sheriff, Dr. Warren, the territorial marshal if necessary. We build a case so airtight that Victor spends the next 20 years in prison." Caleb turned to face her fully. "But I need you to do something difficult. I need you to tell the whole story, every detail, to the sheriff, to the judge, to whoever needs to hear it. Can you do that?" Elena thought about reliving yesterday's terror, about standing in front of strangers and describing her helplessness, about watching men judge whether she was telling the truth or exaggerating for sympathy. Everything in her rebelled against the exposure, the vulnerability it would require. But she thought about Sarah's scream when Victor carried her down the stairs, about Michael's tears, about Thomas's terrified wailing, about what would have happened if Caleb hadn't arrived in time. "Yes, I can do that." "Good." Caleb picked up his rifle. "I'm riding to town to fetch the sheriff. Tom will stay here with you and the children. Daniel's watching the road. Nobody gets near this house without us knowing. Be careful." Something flickered in Caleb's eyes, surprise maybe, that she cared enough to worry. "Always am." He was halfway to his horse when Elena called out, "Caleb?" He turned back. "Last night you said we're a family. Did you mean it?" The question hung in the morning air between them. Caleb studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute certainty. "Every word. You and those children, you're mine to protect, mine to care for. That's not a legal obligation anymore. That's a choice. My choice." He paused. "Is that all right with you?" Elena felt something shift in her chest, some wall she'd built around her heart after James died beginning to crack. This wasn't love, Not yet, but it was something equally valuable. Commitment, partnership, the foundation on which love might eventually grow. Yes, that's more than all right. Caleb nodded once, then mounted his horse and rode toward town, leaving Elena standing on the porch watching him go, feeling like the ground beneath her feet had shifted into a new and unfamiliar landscape. The sheriff arrived 2 hours later with Caleb, along with Dr. Warren and, surprisingly, Judge Whitmore himself. Elena had dressed carefully, covering her bruises with long sleeves despite the warming day, and arranged the children with Margaret in the kitchen with cookies and milk while the men gathered in Caleb's study. Mrs. Hartman, Judge Whitmore's expression was grave. Your husband has made serious allegations against Victor Moore. I need to hear your account of yesterday's events. Elena had prepared herself for this, had rehearsed the words in her head while braiding Sarah's hair, but speaking them aloud still required every ounce of courage she possessed. She told them everything: Victor's drunken arrival, his threats, the men he'd brought with him, being bound and gagged, the plan to burn the house with her inside, the children's screams as they were carried away. Her voice remained steady through most of it, but it cracked when she described Sarah calling for Papa Caleb, when she explained how close they'd come to losing everything. The sheriff, a weathered man named Carson, took careful notes. You're saying Victor Moore explicitly stated his intention to kill you and make it look like an accident? Yes, he told his men to burn the house with me in it, said it would be tragic but believable. And you're prepared to testify to this under oath? I am. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. Mrs. Hartman, I'll be frank with you. Victor Moore will claim you're lying, that this is retaliation for his custody petition. He'll say you invented this story to destroy him. The defense will be brutal. They'll question your character, your motives, your marriage to Mr. Hartman. Are you prepared for that? Elena met his eyes without flinching. They can question whatever they want. I know what happened. My children know what happened. The truth doesn't change because someone questions it. Well said. Dr. Warren spoke for the first time. But the judge is right about one thing. You'll need more than testimony. You'll need evidence. I have evidence. Caleb stood and moved to his desk, pulling out items wrapped in cloth. The ropes they used to bind Elena still have her blood on them from where they cut her wrists, the gag they used, and this, he unwrapped a piece of charred wood. Found it by the fireplace. They'd already started building up the fire before we arrived, preparing to burn the house. Sheriff Carson examined each item carefully. This is good. Concrete. But what we really need is a witness. One of the men Victor brought with him, willing to testify about the plan. You won't get that, Elena said quietly. Those men were loyal to Victor. They won't turn on him. Maybe not willingly. The sheriff's smile was thin and sharp. But men like that have a way of talking when they're facing 20 years in prison themselves. Give me a day to round up Victor and his crew. I'll find someone willing to make a deal. Judge Whitmore stood. Sheriff Carson, I'm authorizing you to arrest Victor Moore and any men identified as being present during yesterday's attack. Charge them with attempted murder, kidnapping, assault, conspiracy. Let's see how brave they are when facing a noose. The word should have brought Elena satisfaction, but instead she felt only exhausted relief. This nightmare was moving toward an end, though the path there would be painful. After the men left, Elena found Caleb in the barn, brushing down his horse with more force than necessary. She watched him work for a moment, noting the tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw. You're angry. I'm furious. Caleb didn't look at her, kept brushing in long, hard strokes. I keep thinking about what would have happened if Tom hadn't seen those riders. If we'd been 10 minutes later, 5 minutes. If they'd gotten away with the children, if they'd... He stopped, his hand stilling on the brush. I can't stop seeing it, all the ways it could have gone wrong. But it didn't. You saved us. This time. What about next time? What happens when I'm not here? When I can't protect you? Caleb finally turned to face her, and Elena saw the fear beneath his anger. I failed Catherine and Anna. I can't fail you, too. Elena crossed the barn to stand directly in front of him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. You didn't fail them. A lamp fell. A house burned. That wasn't your fault. I should have been there. You were working, doing what needed to be done to provide for your family. You can't be everywhere at once, Caleb. Elena reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm, the tension in his jaw. You can't prevent every possible danger. All you can do is be there when it matters most. And you were. You are. Caleb's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his cheek. His eyes searched hers, looking for something she wasn't sure how to name. When I saw you tied to that chair, he said, his voice rough, when I thought about what they planned to do, I realized something. This stopped being a marriage of convenience weeks ago. Somewhere between teaching you to shoot and listening to your children call me Papa and sitting with you on the porch at night, it became real. You became... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. You became mine. Not a legal obligation. Mine. Elena's breath caught. The admission echoed what she'd been feeling but hadn't let herself acknowledge. That this practical arrangement had transformed into something deeper. Something that felt dangerously close to what she'd had with James in the beginning, before the drink and the gambling and the slow erosion of everything good. I'm afraid, she whispered. Of me? Of this. Of caring again. Of losing again. Elena's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. James destroyed me, Caleb. Not intentionally, but he did. He loved me and I loved him, and it still ended in ruin. How do I trust that this won't end the same way? You don't. Caleb's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, catching a tear that had escaped despite her efforts. You can't know. I can't promise you I won't die tomorrow or that something won't come between us or that we'll have a happy ending. All I can promise is that I'll wake up every day and choose you, choose this family, choose to be the man you need me to be. That's not much of a guarantee. It's all any of us have. Catherine and I had vows and promises and a church wedding, and it still ended with her burning alive while I stood helpless. Love doesn't guarantee anything except the pain when you lose it. His other hand came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite his size. But I'd rather have this, whatever this is between us, and risk the pain than spend the rest of my life alone in this house with nothing but ghosts. Elena closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, letting herself feel the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor since that day in the general store. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to let someone in again? Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. Caleb's forehead rested against hers, close enough that she could feel his breath on her lips. One day at a time. No expectations, no pressure. Just this. Us. Whatever that means. Okay, Elena whispered. Okay. They stood like that for a long moment, not quite kissing, but closer than they'd ever been. Breathing the same air, sharing the same space. Two damaged people trying to find a way forward together. The moment broke when Michael's voice rang out from the house. Papa! Papa! Come quick! Thomas stuck a bean up his nose. Caleb pulled back with a rueful smile. Reality intrudes. Welcome to family life. Elena laughed despite herself, the sound shaky but genuine. Never a dull moment. They walked back to the house together, Caleb's hand finding hers, their fingers interlacing naturally. It was such a small thing, holding hands, but it felt monumental, a public acknowledgement of the shift between them, a declaration that this marriage was becoming something more than paper and practicality. Margaret was trying to extract the bean from Thomas's nose when they entered the kitchen, the boy wailing dramatically while Sarah and Michael watched with fascinated horror. Hold still, you little scamp, Margaret muttered. How did you even get it up there so far? I'll get it. Caleb lifted Thomas easily, held him up to the light, and with practiced efficiency removed the offending bean. There! Crisis averted. Thomas immediately stopped crying and reached for Caleb, wrapping his small arms around his neck. Papa fixed it. The word, Papa, said with such complete trust and affection, hit Caleb visibly. Elena saw his throat work, saw the emotion flash across his face before he controlled it. That's what papas do, he said quietly. They fix things. Sarah tugged on Elena's skirt. Mama, is the bad man coming back? The question silenced the kitchen. All three children looked at Elena with varying degrees of fear and hope, waiting for her to make the world safe again with words. No, sweetheart. The sheriff is arresting him. He won't be able to hurt us anymore. But what if he escapes? What if he comes back at night? Sarah's voice trembled. What if he takes us away and we never see you and Papa again? Elena knelt to Sarah's eye level, pulling Michael close too so all three children could hear her. I won't let that happen. Papa won't let that happen. We're a family now, and families protect each other. Promise? Michael's voice was small. I promise. Elena looked up at Caleb, saw him nod in affirmation. We all promise. That seemed to satisfy them, children's faith in their parents' ability to keep the monsters at bay still intact despite yesterday's trauma. They scattered back to their play, resilient in the way only children could be. Margaret pulled Elena aside as Caleb went to check on the ranch hands. You're falling in love with him. It wasn't a question. Elena wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted instead. Everything's moving so fast. 2 months ago, I was starving in town. Now I'm married to a man I barely know, and I'm starting to feel things I swore I'd never feel again. Feelings aren't the enemy, girl. Fear of feelings is. Margaret's voice was surprisingly gentle. I watched Caleb die inside after Catherine and Anna burned. 6 years he spent as a ghost walking through his own life. Then you came along with your children and your stubbornness, and he started breathing again. Started living instead of just existing. But what if I hurt him? What if this doesn't work? What if it does? Margaret countered. What if you both get to be happy? Why is that so hard to accept? Elena didn't have an answer for that, but the question followed her through the rest of the day, whispering in the back of her mind while she cooked dinner and mended clothes and read stories to the children before bed. Sheriff Carson returned 3 days later with news. Elena and Caleb sat in the study while he delivered his report, his expression grim but satisfied. We arrested Victor and 4 of his men. The other 2 ran, but we'll find them eventually. Carson pulled out his notebook. One of the men, fellow named Jake Harris, decided prison wasn't worth protecting Victor. He's willing to testify to everything. The plan to kidnap the children, the intent to kill you and burn the house, all of it. In exchange, we're reducing his charges to accessory. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. So there will be a trial? There will. Judge Whitmore's scheduled it for 2 weeks from now. It'll be quick, open and shut with Harris's testimony and the physical evidence. Victor's looking at 20 years minimum, probably hanging if the jury's feeling uncharitable. Good. Caleb's voice was flat, final. He deserves worse. Maybe so, but justice will have to suffice. Carson stood. Mrs. Hartman, you'll need to testify. Just tell the truth like you did with me. The jury will believe you. After Carson left, Elena and Caleb sat in silence, the weight of coming closure heavy in the air. It's almost over, Elena said finally. The legal part is. But the rest? Caleb gestured vaguely, encompassing everything between them. That's just beginning. I know. Elena turned to face him. Caleb, about what you said in the barn. About choosing each other. I've been thinking about it. And I'm terrified. But I want to try. Whatever this is, whatever it's becoming, I want to see where it goes. Elena took a breath. I'm not ready for everything. Not yet. But maybe we could start small. Start honest. What does that look like? It looks like you moving your things into my room. Not for... Elena felt her face heat. Not for everything. But so the children see us as a real married couple. So we stop living like strangers sharing a house. Small steps toward something more. Caleb studied her for a long moment. You're sure? No, but I'm willing anyway. Elena managed a small smile. Isn't that what bravery is? Doing the scary thing despite the fear? I suppose it is. Caleb reached across the desk and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. Small steps. I can do small steps. That night, Caleb's belongings appeared in Elena's room, his clothes in the wardrobe, his books on the nightstand, his presence filling the space that had been hers alone. They lay in the darkness on opposite sides of the large bed, careful not to touch, both hyper-aware of the other's breathing. This is awkward, Elena said finally. Very. A pause. Should I go back to my room? No, we just need time to adjust. Elena rolled onto her side, facing his direction, though she could barely see him in the darkness. Tell me something. Something I don't know about you. Like what? Anything. Your childhood, your dreams, what you wanted to be before you became a rancher. Elena heard rustling as he shifted position. I want to know you, Caleb. Really know you. Silence stretched out, and Elena thought perhaps she'd pushed too far. Then Caleb's voice came through the darkness, quiet and reflective. I wanted to be a teacher. Before the war, before everything, I thought I'd teach children to read and write and think. I liked the idea of shaping minds, helping them see the world's possibilities. His laugh was self-deprecating. Then the war came and I learned I was better at destroying than creating, better with a rifle than a book. After it ended, teaching seemed like a foolish dream, so I bought land, built a ranch, made money, built something substantial out of nothing. You're teaching now, Elena said softly, teaching Michael about horses and cattle, teaching Sarah her letters in the evenings, teaching all of them what it means to be safe and loved. That's not the same. It's better. You're teaching them how to live. That's more valuable than any schoolroom lesson. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Your turn. Tell me something I don't know about you. Elena thought about her secrets, her shames, the parts of her past she'd buried. But lying here in the darkness with this man who'd saved her children and offered her a future, she wanted honesty. I loved James when we married, loved him desperately, but I also resented him. He was charming and weak, affectionate and unreliable, and I spent our entire marriage trying to fix him, trying to be enough to make him stop drinking, stop gambling, stop destroying us. Her voice cracked. When he died, part of me was relieved, ashamed and guilty and grief-stricken, but also relieved, and I've hated myself for that relief every day since. She felt the bed shift, felt Caleb's hand find hers in the darkness. Relief isn't wrong. It just means the pain finally stopped. His fingers interlaced with hers. You don't have to fix me, Elena. I'm not James. I'm not broken in ways that will destroy you. I'm just... He paused. Just a man who's been alone too long and is trying to remember how to be part of a family again. I can work with that, Elena whispered. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped between them, two people building a bridge across the space of grief and fear that separated them, one honest word at a time. The trial came and went in a blur of testimony and evidence and Victor's rage-filled denials. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts. Judge Whitmore sentenced Victor to 25 years hard labor, sparing him the noose by a narrow margin. Elena watched him being led away in chains, this man who'd tried to destroy her family, and felt nothing but exhausted relief that it was finally over. Outside the courthouse, Caleb's arm came around her shoulders, solid and reassuring. It's done. It's done, Elena agreed. They rode home through the October afternoon, the children chattering about the trial they'd been shielded from, Margaret knitting in the back of the wagon, and Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of survival, but the stronger, steadier hope of building something lasting, of creating a future instead of just enduring the present. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Elena found Caleb on the porch in his usual spot. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and looked out at the ranch that had become her home. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For everything. For saving my son's life that first day. For protecting us from Victor. For giving us a home. Elena turned to look at him. For choosing us when you didn't have to. Caleb's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with familiar ease. I told you before. You're mine. All of you. That's not something I take lightly. I know. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling his warmth, his steadiness, his absolute certainty. I think I'm starting to believe it. They sat together as darkness fell complete. Two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate losses and built something new from the ruins. Not perfect, not simple, but real and worth fighting for. The worst was behind them now. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. as a family. Winter came to the ranch with the kind of cold that made bones ache and breath freeze in the air. Elena stood at the kitchen window watching snow fall in thick, silent curtains, transforming the familiar landscape into something pristine and new. 5 months had passed since Victor's sentencing, 5 months of slow, careful rebuilding of trust and hope, and something that felt increasingly like love. Behind her, she could hear Caleb reading to the children in front of the fireplace, his deep voice weaving through the story with dramatic pauses that made Sarah giggle and Michael gasp. Thomas had fallen asleep in his lap an hour ago, but Caleb kept reading anyway, his large hand resting protectively on the child's back. Elena pressed her palm against her stomach, feeling the small flutter of movement beneath her skin. 3 months along now, though she hadn't told anyone yet. She'd wanted to be certain, wanted to pass the dangerous early weeks before risking the announcement. But the baby was real, growing stronger every day, a living symbol of the new life they'd built together. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She'd been through pregnancy 3 times with James, but this felt different. Everything with Caleb felt different, steadier, safer, like building on bedrock instead of sand. "You're thinking too loud," Margaret said from where she was kneading bread dough. "I can hear your mind working from here." Elena turned from the window with a slight smile. "Just watching the snow." "And worrying. You're always worrying." Margaret shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. "What is it this time? Money? The children? That husband of yours?" "I'm pregnant." The words fell into the warm kitchen like stones into still water. Margaret's hands stilled in the dough, her eyes sharpening as she studied Elena's face. "How far along?" 3 months? Maybe a little more? Does Caleb know?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure before I told him, before I told anyone." Elena's hand remained on her stomach, protective and instinctive. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose this baby like—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Margaret understood. "Like your body tried to lose that pregnancy with James when the stress got too bad? When there wasn't enough food and you were working yourself into the ground trying to keep everyone afloat?" Margaret's voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel. "This is different, girl. You're healthy now, fed properly, rested. This baby has every chance of making it." "But what if Caleb doesn't want this? We never talked about more children. Our whole marriage has been about raising mine, not creating his." "Then you're blind as well as foolish." Margaret wiped flour from her hands and crossed to Elena, gripping her shoulders firmly. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon. He's been in love with you since September, maybe longer. A baby, his baby, will be the greatest gift you could give him." "You think he loves me?" Elena's voice was small, uncertain. "I know he does. The question is whether you love him back." Elena closed her eyes, letting herself feel the truth she'd been dancing around for months. "Yes, I do. I love him so much it scares me." "Good. Fear means you're alive, means you've got something worth losing." Margaret released her shoulders and returned to her bread. "Now go tell your husband he's going to be a father. Stop hiding in the kitchen with an old woman." Elena found Caleb still in the parlor, the children now all 3 asleep in various positions around him. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening in the way it only did for her and the children. "They ambushed me with exhaustion," he said quietly, careful not to wake them. "One minute we were fighting dragons, the next they'd all surrendered to sleep." Elena smiled at the picture they made, this large, dangerous man surrounded by small, trusting children, all of them completely at peace. "You're good with them. They're easy to be good to." Caleb carefully shifted Thomas to a more comfortable position. "What's wrong? You've had that look all day." "What look?" "The one that means you're working up courage to say something difficult." He studied her face with those storm-gray eyes that saw too much. "Just tell me, Elena, whatever it is, we'll handle it together." Elena sat in the chair across from him, suddenly uncertain how to form the words. In the end, she chose directness. "I'm pregnant, about 3 months along." Caleb went completely still. For a heartbeat, 2, 3, Elena couldn't read his expression. Then his eyes dropped to her stomach, still flat beneath her dress, and something profound shifted in his face. A baby. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Our baby. Yes, I know we never discussed. This wasn't planned, and if you're not ready... Not ready? Caleb carefully extricated himself from the sleeping children and crossed to kneel before her chair, his hands finding hers. Elena, do you know what this means? A child. Ours together. A symbol that this family isn't just built from broken pieces, but creating something new. Relief flooded through her so strongly she felt dizzy. You're happy about this? Happy doesn't begin to cover it. His hand moved to her stomach, resting there with reverent gentleness. I thought I'd never have this again. Never have a wife to share this with. Never watch a child grow who carried my blood and my name. I'd made peace with that loss, and now... His voice cracked. Now you're giving me everything I thought I'd buried with Catherine and Anna. I'm scared, Elena admitted. Scared something will go wrong. Scared I'll fail you the way I couldn't save James from himself. Scared this happiness is too fragile to last. Then we'll be scared together. Caleb lifted her hands to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. But Elena, listen to me. You didn't fail James. James failed himself, and he failed you and those children. You did everything humanly possible to save him. His destruction was his own choice, his own weakness. You can't carry that guilt anymore. I don't know how to put it down. Then let me help you. Caleb's thumb brushed across her cheek, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Let me love you enough for both of us, until you remember how to love yourself. Let me prove that not all men are James, that not all marriages end in ruin. Elena leaned forward until their foreheads touched, breathing in his familiar scent of leather and sage and safety. I love you. I should have said it before now, but I was afraid. I know. I love you too. Have for months. Caleb's smile was gentle, understanding. We've both been dancing around it, afraid to speak the words in case saying them made them vulnerable to loss. But I'm done being afraid, Elena. Life's too short and too precious to waste on fear. She kissed him then, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as his arms came around her, solid and sure. It wasn't their first kiss. There had been a few careful, chaste kisses over the past months, but it was the first one weighted with complete honesty, with love freely acknowledged and fear set aside. When they pulled apart, Sarah was watching them from the couch with sleepy, knowing eyes. Are you and Papa kissing? Her voice held more curiosity than judgment. Elena felt her face flush. Yes, sweetheart. Married people do that sometimes. Good. Sarah yawned hugely. Mrs. Henderson said you weren't really married because you don't act like you love each other. But I knew she was wrong because Papa looks at you the way the prince looks at the princess in my storybook. When did Mrs. Henderson say that? Caleb's voice held a dangerous edge. Last week when Margaret took us to town for supplies. She was talking to Mrs. Pritchard about how your marriage is just for show and you'll probably get divorced soon. Sarah rubbed her eyes. I told her she was stupid and that Papa loves Mama very much. Margaret said I shouldn't call adults stupid, but she didn't say I was wrong. Elena couldn't help but laugh at the image of her 6-year-old daughter defending their marriage to the town gossips. You shouldn't call adults stupid, but thank you for standing up for us. You're welcome. Can we have cocoa now? The mundane request after such a profound moment was so perfectly childlike that both Elena and Caleb laughed. They woke Michael and Thomas, and the family migrated to the kitchen, where Margaret had cocoa waiting as if she'd known they'd need it. Later, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Elena and Caleb lay together in the darkness of their shared room. Over the months, they'd progressed from sleeping on opposite sides of the bed to gravitating toward each other in sleep. And now Elena rested with her head on his shoulder, his arm around her, their bodies fitted together with natural ease. We should go to town tomorrow, Caleb said into the darkness. Make an announcement about the baby. Let everyone know at once rather than letting rumors build. They'll say terrible things, that I trapped you, that I got pregnant deliberately to secure my position. Let them say what they want. We know the truth. His hand found her stomach again, resting there as if he could already feel the life growing beneath. This baby is wanted. This marriage is real. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth our concern. Elena thought about the past 6 months, about how far they'd come from that desperate day in the general store. She thought about the family they'd built from broken pieces, about the love that had grown slowly but surely between them, about this new life that represented hope and healing. "I never thought I'd be happy again," she said quietly. "After James died, after everything fell apart, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life just surviving, just keeping my children alive and nothing more. And now? Now I'm not just surviving. I'm living, really living." She turned in his arms to face him, her hand coming up to trace the lines of his face in the darkness. "You gave me that. You and this ranch and this strange, wonderful family we've made. You gave it to me too. I was dead inside, Elena, going through the motions but feeling nothing. Then you walked into that general store with your children and your pride and your desperation, and something in me woke up." Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. "You brought life back to this house. Brought life back to me." They kissed again, and this time it carried the promise of everything they'd been building toward. A real marriage, a real partnership, a real love that had been forged in fire and fear and emerged stronger for it. The announcement in town went exactly as Elena had predicted. Mrs. Henderson sniffed disapprovingly. Mrs. Pritchard made pointed comments about the timing. The banker's wife wondered loudly whether the child was really Caleb's or if Elena had been unfaithful. Caleb's response was immediate and final. He moved his entire ranch account to the bank in Blackwater, pulled his business from Henderson's general store and started buying supplies in the next town over, and made it clear that anyone who insulted his wife would find themselves on the wrong side of the most powerful rancher in 3 territories. The gossip continued, but it lost its teeth. People could talk all they wanted, but they couldn't touch the family that Caleb Hartman had claimed as his own. Winter deepened, and with it, Elena's pregnancy. She grew round and healthy, her face filling out, color returning to her cheeks. The children were fascinated by the coming baby, constantly asking questions and putting their hands on her growing belly to feel the kicks. Christmas came, and Caleb bought gifts for everyone: dolls for Sarah, toy horses for Michael and Thomas, a beautiful shawl for Margaret, and a delicate silver locket for Elena with space for photographs of their children. "All of them," he said when she opened it. "Sarah, Michael, Thomas, and this new one. All our children together." Elena cried and blamed the tears on pregnancy, even though they both knew it was more than that. Spring arrived with the baby. Elena's labor started on a warm April morning when the wildflowers were blooming across the pastures and the air smelled of new grass and possibility. Margaret sent the children to stay with one of the ranch hands and his wife, and Dr. Warren arrived within an hour of being summoned. The labor was long, but not difficult, and when the baby finally arrived, a son, healthy and squalling, Caleb wept openly as he held the tiny, red-faced infant. "He's perfect," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "He's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Elena was exhausted but exhilarated, watching her husband cradle their son with infinite gentleness. Caleb looked at the baby for a long moment, then at Elena, then back at the child. "James," he said quietly, "for your first husband, to honor the man who gave you those 3 children and who, despite his flaws, loved you the best he knew how. And Caleb, for middle name, to carry forward." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She'd expected Caleb to want to name the baby after his lost father or brother, had prepared herself to argue if he suggested forgetting James entirely. But this generous acknowledgement of the man she'd loved before him, was so perfectly Caleb that it made her heart ache. "James Caleb Hartman," she whispered. "It's perfect." When the other children were finally allowed to meet their new brother, they crowded around the bed with wide eyes and gentle hands. Sarah was appointed official big sister in charge of watching over everyone. Michael declared himself the baby's protector. Thomas, at 3, was more interested in the baby's tiny fingers than anything else. "This is our family," Caleb said, standing at the foot of the bed and looking at all of them. Elena exhausted but glowing, the new baby nursing contentedly, the 3 older children clustered close. All of us together. Blood doesn't matter. Love is what makes a family. Elena watched her husband. This man who'd saved her life and her children's lives, who'd given them everything when they had nothing, who'd taught her heart how to love again, and felt a peace so profound it brought fresh tears. She'd walked into that general store 6 months ago with 11 cents and 3 starving children, desperate and humiliated and convinced her life was over. She'd been ready to beg, to grovel, to sacrifice every shred of dignity just to get milk for her dying son. And instead she'd found this, found Caleb, found a home that had been waiting for them, empty and echoing with old grief, ready to be filled with new life and new love. The journey from that desperate woman to this moment, surrounded by her children, holding her newborn son, loved by a good man, seemed impossible, like something from one of Sarah's fairy tales rather than real life. But it was real. The baby's weight in her arms was real. Caleb's hand on her shoulder was real. The laughter of her children was real. The safety and security and love that filled this house were all real. 2 years later, Elena stood in the same kitchen where she'd first told Margaret about her pregnancy, watching spring rain fall across the ranch. She was pregnant again, 6 months along this time, and moving with the careful waddle of a woman carrying another life. Sarah was 8 now, and teaching Thomas his letters with bossy enthusiasm. Michael was 6 and convinced he was going to be the best rancher in Texas when he grew up. Thomas was 5 and currently obsessed with every bug and creature he could find. And baby James, not quite a baby anymore at 2, toddled through the house with determined independence, following Caleb everywhere like a devoted shadow. The ranch had prospered. Caleb had expanded the cattle operation, bought more land, hired more hands. They'd built a small schoolhouse on the property where Elena taught not just their own children, but the children of ranch workers and neighboring families. She'd found her calling in teaching, discovered a talent for making letters and numbers come alive for young minds. Margaret still ran the household with iron efficiency, though she'd taken on help as age made the work harder. Dr. Warren visited regularly, having become a close family friend. Even Judge Whitmore had softened toward them, impressed by the way they'd built a life together despite the odds. The town gossips still talked, but their words had lost their power. Elena had learned that people would always judge, would always find reasons to disapprove, and their opinions mattered far less than the love inside her home. She heard the front door open, heard children's voices raised in excitement as Caleb returned from checking the herds. He came to find her in the kitchen, as he always did, dropping a kiss on her forehead before his hand went to her rounded belly. "How are my girls today?" "Girls? What makes you so sure this one's a girl?" "Just a feeling." Caleb's smile was soft, content. "We have 3 boys. Time for a daughter of our own." "Sarah's your daughter." "Sarah's our daughter. But this one," he patted her stomach gently, "this one we'll watch grow from the very beginning. Teach her to ride, to read, to be strong like her mother." Elena leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the solid warmth of him against her back. "I love you. I love you too." The words came easily now, said a dozen times a day in a dozen different ways. Every day more than the last. That evening, the whole family gathered on the porch, as had become their tradition. Caleb and Elena in the chairs, the children scattered around them, Margaret knitting nearby. The spring rain had cleared, leaving the air clean and fresh, the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Tell us the story, Mama," Sarah said, as she always did. "Tell us about the day you met Papa." Elena looked at Caleb, saw the gentle amusement in his eyes, and began the tale they all knew by heart. Once upon a time, there was a widow with 3 children and only 11 cents to her name. She was so desperate and scared that she walked into a general store to beg for help, knowing she'd be humiliated but hoping someone would show mercy. "And nobody did," Michael chimed in, knowing his part. "They were all mean." They were. Except for one man who walked through the door and saw past the dirt and desperation to the mother fighting for her children's lives. "Papa," Thomas said with satisfaction, "Papa saved you." "He did. He saved all of us. And in saving us, he saved himself too, because he'd been lost in grief and loneliness for so long, he'd forgotten what family felt like. And then you got married and had baby James, and now you're having another baby, and we're all a family forever," Sarah finished with dramatic flair. "Forever," Elena agreed, catching Caleb's eye and seeing the love there that never dimmed, never wavered, never failed. The sun sank lower, painting the ranch in golden light. The children's voices rose and fell in conversation. Margaret's knitting needles clicked steadily, and Elena sat surrounded by everything she'd nearly lost, everything she'd found, everything she'd built from the ashes of her old life. She'd come to this ranch with nothing but fear and desperation and 11 cents. She'd found love and safety and a future so bright it made her old dreams seem pale and lifeless in comparison. The woman who'd stood outside Henderson's general store barely recognized herself in the woman she'd become, confident, loved, secure in ways she'd never imagined possible. And the man beside her, once broken by loss and isolation, had transformed into the heart of their family, the foundation on which everything else was built. They'd both been destroyed by their pasts. Both carried scars that would never fully heal, but they'd found each other in the wreckage, had chosen each other despite every reason not to, and had built something beautiful from their broken pieces. As darkness fell complete and the first stars appeared overhead, Caleb's hand found Elena's, their fingers interlacing with the practiced ease of long familiarity. No words were needed. They'd said everything that mattered in 1,000 small moments over the years, in gentle touches and shared laughter, in quiet support and fierce protection, in the life they'd created together. The last 11 cents Elena had possessed on that desperate August day had bought her nothing. But the man who'd stepped forward when she had nothing, who'd seen her worth when everyone else saw only failure, who'd loved her children as his own and taught her heart to hope again, he'd given her everything. And sitting on the porch of the ranch that had become home, surrounded by the family they'd built together, Elena understood the truth at the heart of their story. She hadn't lost everything that day in the general store. She'd lost everything that didn't matter and found everything that did. Love, family, home, hope. The things that couldn't be bought with money, no matter how much you had. The things that could only be built through choice and courage and the willingness to trust again, even after trust had been shattered. Caleb squeezed her hand gently, and Elena squeezed back, a silent conversation that said everything their hearts felt. They'd survived, they'd healed, they'd loved, and they'd built a life together that was worth every moment of fear and pain it had taken to get there. As the children's voices faded into sleepy murmurs and the night settled soft around them, Elena closed her eyes and sent a silent thank you to whatever force had brought her to this place, to this man, to this life she'd never dared dream possible. She'd started with nothing but desperation and 11 cents. She'd found everything.